Здравствуйте, comrades. Welcome to Socialism Saturday. Has it been a heck of a week or what? I don't know about you, but I've had one heck of a week. I'm going to admit I'm feeling a bit sluggish today, but Socialism Saturday stops for no one. And I promised you guys I was going to go extra dystopian today because, I'm going to be honest, last week's Socialism Saturday, a little bit disappointing for me. Not quite up to my typical standards of dystopian. The socialist book publisher let us down. This is the first time it's happened. But you know what? What topic do I go to when other topics let me down? What topic never, ever, ever fails to deliver the dystopia that we are all here for? What topic might we be watching tonight? Do you think we're watching Abolish the Family? Yes, we are. We are watching. No, this is not a Sophie Lewis one, though. I found a different Abolish the Family crew. Now, who is in this one is Sophie Lewis's partner in crime, M.E. O'Brien or Michelle O'Brien. So Sophie Lewis and Michelle O'Brien or M.E. O'Brien, they're like BFFs. They like kind of think the same way. But I was like, we can't watch Sophie Lewis again. We watch Sophie Lewis like all the effing time. We have to diversify our abolition of the family. And so I did find a new Abolish the Family. I'm like 75% sure we haven't watched this one before. I don't think we have. You know what? If we did watch it, it was like a long ass time ago. And so it's okay if we watch it again, but we are watching an Abolish the Family presentation today. This is from a group called the Learning Cooperative. You can see there she is. There's Sophie Lewis right there. But this is from a different group. This is called the Learning Cooperative in association with the Red Clinic. The Red Clinic continues with its series of monthly events exploring the links between the psychoanalytic clinic and radical politics. Abolish the Family, psychoanalytic Marxian perspectives, brings together leading voices in the contemporary calls for alternative models of care and child rearing beyond the atomized nuclear family. If you have never seen an Abolish the Family presentation, we've got 2 hours of Abolish the Family tonight, ladies and gentlemen. 2 hours. Is there anyone in the chat? I'm honestly curious. Is there anyone in the chat who has not seen Abolish the Family? I know many of my regulars have. We even know Sophie Lewis by name. Sophie Lewis and I are basically best friends at this point. But if you here's what I need to emphasize about Abolish the Family. These people are real. This is not made up. This is not a prank. These people are real. And although we are not going to be watching one of the higher ed presentations of the Abolish the Family concept, I want everyone to really know and understand the topic that we will be talking about tonight has absolutely 100% been presented at multiple Ivy League universities. We watched one of those Ivy League universities on this channel not too long ago. Sophie Lewis spoke and actually works at the University of Pennsylvania. I've also seen her speak at Brown University. This is not an abstract thing in the wacky world of academia. Okay. So I really want people to understand as we dig into Abolish the Family. These are not people that are in their mom's basement. These are people that are actually at leading influential institutions. And these are ideas they are considering. And they are bat something insane. I'm not allowed to swear in the first 8 minutes of my videos anymore, or so I've been told. They are bat something insane. And so we're going to listen to them tonight. It's going to be beautiful and glorious. That's what we do on Socialism Saturday. On Socialism Saturday, which is Saturdays at 6 p.m. each week, we watch a full socialist presentation from start to finish. We watch the boring bits, we watch the cringy bits, we watch the absolute dystopian insanity unfold right in front of us. These are not CNN socialists, these are not AOC socialists, these are real socialists, the farthest left of the far left. They have their own culture. It's fascinating. I can't wait to get started. So a couple things before we jump into Socialism Saturday for today is so I'm gonna be honest, guys. I've been a little bit of a Substack slacker in the last week. Okay. I have a Substack. It's Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. Sadly, in the past week, I have not been posting as much as I usually do. So I do apologize for the lack of content on my Substack. I promise that's going to be changing. I do have a very good reason for it, though. Well, I think it's a good reason. Sometimes we just run out of time in the day. But I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But there will be a lot more content coming this week. I do actually have a bunch of articles that are like half started that I just didn't get a chance to like sit down and finish. So that will be coming. But the reason you want to know about my Substack is because tomorrow we have our weekly movie night, and tomorrow we are watching Goodfellas in honor of Jennifer. You know, that's the way we went, and I'm really looking forward to it. I need a good I need Goodfellas. I need blood. I need mobsters. I need all this stuff. We're gonna have a great time. We will be watching Goodfellas tomorrow in the supporter Discord. Now, how do you get into the supporter Discord, do you ask? Well, one way is by becoming a supporter on my Substack for $5 a month, $50 a year. I send out a weekly newsletter each week where not only do you get, this is last week's newsletter, not only do you get kind of like news and content that I've been working on for the week, but you also get access to your supporter perks. If you want to get into the supporter Discord, what you need to do is sign up as a member. You can sign up as a member of my YouTube channel if you want to, which of course I greatly appreciate. You can sign up as a paying member of my locals community. You can sign up as a paying member of my Patreon, or you can sign up as a paying member of my Substack. Sometime tomorrow, probably in the afternoon, you are going to get an email from my Substack for all supporters that is going to have, among other things, our weekly Zoom calls for the week, because all of my supporters get access to two, not one, but two private, unrecorded Zoom calls that we do every single week with my community. They are the best. You also get access to my supporter Discord. And so the way the newsletter works is you basically have to scroll down to the bottom where there's a little paywall there. And that gives you access to the supporter Discord. And you can come and watch Goodfellas with us tomorrow night. And after that, movie night is switching to Carlin's Month of Narcissism. I will be picking out all of the movies in the month of April, except for the last week, so I'm going to a concert, but we're going to make up for that in May. And so this is the last movie night that I didn't pick out before Carlin's Month of Narcissism. You guys are stuck with me for a month after this, but I promise we're going to watch some great movies. We're going to watch American Beauty. We are going to watch Wet Hot American Summer. We are going to watch The Legend of Billie Jean. We're going to watch The Wolf of Wall Street. And then in May, for my makeup movie night, because I was supposed to get 5, we're watching Killer Clowns from Outer Space. It's going to be great. We're going to have a lot of good movies coming up. And of course, Goodfellas is an amazing movie too. So I do hope you guys will join me as a supporter on whichever platform is most convenient for you, and come and join us for a movie night tomorrow. It's going to be awesome. Now, that's not the only thing I'm doing tomorrow, because I did mention this was a pretty difficult week for me. And the reason, and this is a little inside baseball, so you're just going to have to forgive me for a moment. This might not be interesting for a lot of people, but for people who have been following my story for a while, this might be interesting to you. The reason that it's been a really difficult week for me is that a lot of my friends and myself were purged out of the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus for no good effing reason. And it was done in the most underhanded way. I have never seen anything like this. I supported the Mises Caucus for 2 years. I spent thousands of dollars of my own money supporting the Mises Caucus. I traveled to support the Mises Caucus. I wrote about the Mises Caucus in my book. I shilled for the Mises Caucus a lot. Well, in the past week, that all went to hell. And I am going to explain why that went to hell and show you the receipts of that tomorrow at 2 p.m. Okay? So if this is something you're interested in, I normally don't stream on Sundays, but this is where I wanted to fit this in. I wanted to do this stream this weekend, and I'm going to explain exactly what happened with the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus, why there is no more Mises Caucus in New Hampshire, no matter what they say. If they are telling you that there is a Mises Caucus in New Hampshire, they are lying. There is no more Mises Caucus in New Hampshire. And that's because they kicked everyone out and they pissed everyone off and they spit in everyone's faces and they didn't listen to us. And I'm going to show the receipts for all of this. And this is one of those rare instances where, and this might be hard to believe, I actually wasn't even involved in this. I was not involved at all. But I happened to have access to the receipts because of reasons that I will explain tomorrow. And I was, quite frankly, I felt extremely stabbed in the back. I am extremely disappointed with a lot of people. It really does break my heart. So I had a really tough week with this. I know a lot of my friends had a really tough week with this. And I'm going to explain exactly why and what happened tomorrow at 2 p.m. And that's the way it's going to go. What do you mean Matt Walsh is trying to steal viewers from me? What are you talking about? Is he like live right now or something? Who cares about Matt Walsh? F that guy. F that guy. So, guys, that is what we're doing for tonight. We are going to be watching Abolish the Family. Now, if you have never been here for a Socialism Saturday before, there's a couple things you need to know. Number one, we do generally have rules in my chat. The two rules in my chat are: number one, don't be a dick. Number two, no whining. Oh, you got an ad for him before the stream? Well, I guess I'm benefiting from Matt Walsh in some way, aren't I? So just don't be a dick, no whining. We just keep it nice for everyone. I do not have an unmoderated chat. We usually don't have a problem with it on Socialism Saturday. But the other thing you need to know about Socialism Saturday is that if you are not used to watching socialists, they speak a completely different language. Okay? So it might sound like they're speaking English and you might hear English words coming out of their mouth, but you might be thinking in your head, what the hell are they talking about? What are they saying? I don't understand. If you have never watched Socialists before, that's normal, okay? I really want you to understand this. It's not you, it's them. They have, as Yasmin is expertly saying, and that's a lovely photo, Yasmin, they use a coded language so they can understand each other, but it's a little bit difficult for us to understand them. Well, Vosh isn't a real socialist. Vosh is, shall we say, a champagne socialist. These are the real socialists. But Vosh might be informative for this stuff. You got to let me know, Kevin, if Vosh has helped you to understand these people. But I guess I just want to reassure you, if you don't know what they're talking about and you're confused, that's okay. Ask questions in the chat. I will try to decipher. The chat will try to decipher. We will all help each other learn what the socialists are doing, because the whole point of this is to understand what these people are doing, what these people are thinking, being able to understand their perspective, because these people are winning. These people are winning really, really badly. They're kicking all our asses. And the only way that we're ever going to be able to defeat them is if we understand them. You have to understand your enemy in order to be able to beat them. Okay? So this is about listening to understand. You know what? There's not a lot of listening going on in the world right now. There hasn't been a lot of listening with the Mises Caucus in the last week. There's rarely listening in any sort of political sphere. And I think that listening and understanding people that you disagree with is the key to being able to succeed and achieve the goals that we want to achieve. So that's why we watch Socialism Saturday. It's not about arguing with them, it is about understanding them. Now, of course, I do also have a beer for Socialism Saturday, which I'm sure is going to make me even more tired than I am. We've got our Emmanuel beer, which, if you haven't seen the viral video with the emu Emmanuel who likes to knock down the cell phone, it's hilarious. But this is Emmanuel went so viral, he got a beer named after him. And this beer is called Emmanuel Don't Brew It. It's a sour ale with blueberry, strawberry, raspberry, blackberry, marshmallow, vanilla Madagascar, and graham cracker. I needed a good dessert beer. All right. I needed a good dessert one. Let's open it and see what it looks like. And then we're going to get started. Oh God, the leechers. I wish I had a coffee right now. I really do. I am so tired. I really, really am. I try to drink red beers for Socialism Saturday. That's red enough. Yes, we've seen this one before. Because I wanted just a good comfort beer. All right. Delicious. Cheers, guys. Happy Saturday. All right. Let me get this set up so I can actually play the sound. There we go. Guys, we're doing Socialism Saturday. We got 2 hours of Abolish the Family. Hunker down. Yeah, bot the AI art was the problem last night. I'm going to tell you that. Bot was screwing around with AI art. And do you know what? Okay, side note. Bot and Incognito and I were messing around with AI art last night, and probably some other people were as well. And do you know what we discovered from AI art is that Bot tried to make a picture of Xi Jinping manipulating Joe Biden like a ventriloquist, like a puppet. And apparently, you can't make AI art with Xi Jinping. Well, that tells you who's controlling the AI art, doesn't it? It is even just putting Xi Jinping's name in. You cannot make AI art with Xi Jinping. And Bot, I think, tried multiple AI art platforms. So if you're doing AI art, check and see if you can make AI art with Xi Jinping and just see what it spits back at you, because I want to know how many platforms this is actually against their terms of service on, because I know we tried at least 2 and it was against the terms of service of both. You can make AI art with Joe Biden, you can make AI art with Donald Trump, you can make it with any other politician, but not the president of China. Isn't that interesting? Anyway, guys, please mount that like button if you would be so kind. Let's get started with Socialism Saturday.
Family abolition. We have Michelle O'Brien, a sociologist, psychotherapist, and editor of Pinko, as well as the author of a forthcoming book on family abolition.
Oh, holy shit, Michelle O'Brien's a therapist? I didn't know that.
We have a philosopher, filmmaker, blogger, podcaster, man about town, Daniel Tutt, who recently published Psychoanalysis and the Politics of the Family on Springer, with about some issues in Lacanian Marxism and the role of the family. And Jules Gleason, a writer, an historian, and you might know her for the book she recently edited, Transgender Marxism on Pluto, which was a really stellar
transgender Marxism person is
compilation
here. Oh, great.
Of works on trans studies, Marxist theory.
We've seen her before.
And I'm really excited to hear the contributions these folks have for you all today. So I'm just going to let them take it away. They're going to be 3 short talks from Michelle, Daniel, and Jules, followed by some questions from the audience. So if you have any questions or thoughts on what the panelists are saying, go ahead and put them in the chat. Just so you know, this is being recorded, but we're not using your audio or video for the later recording of this without your consent. So just go ahead and put any questions or thoughts you might have in the Zoom chat or Zoom Q&A, and we will get to them after all 3 of our speakers today have finished their presentations. So again, I'm really excited. Q&A is always the best. For everyone to be here today. And without further ado, Michelle, if you want to take it away.
Sounds great. Okay. It says I can't screen share.
Therapist. This person's a therapist. Let's just keep
Sorry
that in
about
mind.
that. Luke, would you mind?
Okay, here we go.
This
How
is a year
that?
ago.
Can you see my
So
slide?
it's very recent.
Great. Okay. Hello, everyone. So for my talk today, I've a couple of images from book covers and things that I wrote, but mostly I'm going to show you work of the artist Gordon Matta Clark, who I don't have anything in particular to say about. So I hope you enjoy the images. So I want to begin by thinking
Kevin,
that
what
the
platform
program's
were you using,
organizers,
if you don't mind me
public
asking?
events on family abolition are still quite rare. And it's a particular honor to be appearing here with these two other co-speakers. Jules' co-authored 2015 essay, Kindercom, was the first text
Akshay,
of
thank you
family
for the reminder.
abolition I
Bingo
came
cards.
across written in my adult life, and has really done a tremendous amount to open up the space for this kind of conversation. Daniel Tutt's more recent book is very impressive. I'm only about halfway through it, but I'm very, very excited about it. I considered several approaches to today's talk. I have a number of published pieces
Here's
and
your
a
bingo
forthcoming
cards.
book on family abolition. And the obvious thing to do might have been to read an excerpt from it. But I decided not to do that. I thought of writing something really original, trying to engage the topic, and decided couldn't quite manage that for reasons I'll talk about. Yesterday, as I was working on this, I had an admissions interview for the next phase of my psychoanalytic training. I'm 2 years in at the moment, and there's some incremental interviews along the way. And the interviewer opened the interview asking if I was a communist and closed the interview asking if I was a trans woman. And the experience was quite unsettling and brought up a lot of things about my kind of political alienation from some of the conservative leaning, liberal leaning psychoanalytic community that I've encountered in New York. And for various personal reasons, made it very difficult to sort of generate this topic and engage on it. So instead, I've decided to give you a kind of slightly personal intellectual trajectory on questions of family abolition, sort of following the arc of some of my work and thinking about some of the topics that I was engaging as I was working on it. And hopefully this will be somewhat interesting to you all. So first up here, I was involved as the lead editor of an anthology, the cover depicted here, on revolutionary feminist thought that was a part of a communist readers put together by activists roughly linked in the communization tradition. And I found a peculiar puzzle as I was working through the many decades of mostly communist, but also anarchist and radical feminist writing about gender and sexuality, that many, many authors return to critiquing the family as the kind of focus of their thinking about how to transform gender relations in capitalism. But what they meant by family was really quite widely varied, as were their proposals for how to overcome it. My longest work to date on family abolition tries to grapple with the questions raised by this reader. It's an article and notes, and it argues that the changing meanings of family map onto structural changes in the condition of working class reproduction. So as capitalism changed over the course of the 19th and 20th century, the terrain of how working class people were able to live and organize their domestic arrangements changed. And this in turn transformed the communist thinking about what the role of the family was, or how family abolitionists envisioned transforming society. The historical genealogy of family abolitionism also helped me think about how a critique of the family is a powerful tool of forging what Marxist feminists sometimes call a unitary theory, one that effectively embeds gender and sexual oppression within the circuits of a capitalist society. The family under capitalism
capitalism is to blame for everything.
Pivot, linking together capitalist labor markets, gender roles, sexual relations, the organization of unwaged labor, and constraints on the means of survival for gender and sexual deviance. Adopting a normative family form, I argue in that essay, was a strategy through which a sector of the white working class in North America and Europe asserted their social legitimacy as part of a broader struggle to win the franchise and build power. This legitimacy was formed in direct opposition to and in contrast to those excluded from normative family forms,
Bot made a
such as sex
socialist
workers,
bot.
queers, the very poor, indigenous people resisting colonial subjugation, and the Black working class. Race and colonialism are central to constituting this social legitimacy. The family is a system of privatized households, as Jules recently commented to me, was a central mechanism of indigenous dispossession and colonization. In the United States, racist state policies.
Did you guys catch that she had a problem with the family being about privatized households, and they're basically blaming racism on the family being privatized households? Remember, these people want to abolish all private property, and they consider the family unit to be private property. So they don't just want to get rid of your business or your home or your car or any of those, like, material things. They consider the family to be private property.
In labor markets undermine the possibility of
We
Black
all clap
family
for you.
stability.
That's it.
Black feminists
We
have been
celebrate you in the
particularly
chat.
tuned to the pathologization and repression of Black intimacy, Black women's erotic life outside the family, the heterogeneity of Black care relationships, and have questioned and debated the desirability of aspiring to achieve a Black family that resembled its white
That's really impressive, Kevin.
In surveying this history, I developed a deepening skepticism about efforts to imagine family abolition under the conditions of a capitalist society. For one, despite decades of living in various queer and trans deliberate communities and households, and having an unconventional domestic and parenting configuration in my own life, I don't particularly value
an unconventional domestic and parenting configuration. What do we think that means? So Emmy O'Brien, and I don't want to assume their pronouns because I truly have no godly idea, has an unconventional domestic and like family relationship. What does that mean? I'm betting it's like polyamory or something like that, but who knows?
valorize voluntarist attempts at alternative forms of living within a capitalist society. Though there are some basic considerations of care, consent, love, facilitating development that we can judge families on today, I don't want to spend much time on judging people's personal choices about who they live with, who they parent with, or their currently existing domestic arrangements. Tutt's book makes some compelling arguments about the need for patient experimentation in domestic arrangements, a call I certainly attempt to live in my own life. Those trying to live differently, however, will come up against the contradictions of labor market dynamics, private property, and the capitalist state. The only way to form stable, alternative, chosen family household arrangements under capitalism is the same as it takes to form a stable normative family: access to owning private property, access to a steady income stream, and the tolerance of your local state authorities, not a template for generalized working class rebellion. Nor does family abolition primarily interest me as an incremental call for social democratic reform. Done well, expansions of collectively available, non-commodified social goods do help accomplish what conservatives fear they may: allowing people to flee abusive and bad husbands or parents and expanding the opportunity to form less.
You think that conservatives don't want people to flee bad husbands or parents? Well, I mean, hang on. Well, you know what? This person might actually have a point, because conservatives are like ranting and raving every time someone talks about the eventuality in which a child might not have great parents or a great relationship with their parents. So maybe conservatives are proving them right. I don't know. But I generally don't think that that's what they want.
Normative domestic structures, affordable housing, universal health care, generous cash transfer benefits, and similar programs can assist those who desire more and desire differently than the normative family. But for a number of reasons, many connected to the political and economic dynamics of the last 50 years, I'm skeptical about politics organized around pursuing social benefits under the capitalist state. Further, family abolition, as I and many of my comrades go through my discussion around the topic, is not primarily an attack on existing families. Though I acknowledge families are often a site of tremendous brutality, abuse, pain, for many people, it is also one of the few sources of
families are a site of tremendous abuse, brutality, and pain. So what these people do is they try to paint pregnancy as basically like the worst thing that can ever happen. It's life-threatening to the majority of women. Why would anyone ever want to get pregnant? Because they want to eliminate biological birth. They want all kids to be born via surrogates. And so now they're doing the same thing with the family, right? They're saying families are abusive, it's horrible, but
care and love, and often an otherwise almost unique space of unconditional, consistent relationships. Abolition, in this sense, is not simply the destruction of an old institution. Instead, as Marx used it, and it draws on the Hegelian notion of abolition as simultaneously destroying while also preserving and lifting up. Family abolition is a commitment to necessary interpersonal care as a universal, collective, and shared social good. The versions of family abolition I found most compelling are, first and foremost, an overcoming of class society and its organizing of domestic life as a collection of private households.
They think they'll be able to overcome class society by abolishing the family.
Rejected consolidating social reproduction into centralized state institutions and rejected generalized wage labor and market dependency. Many past versions of critiques of the family, to some extent, do both. Instead, I was trying to think about how under social conditions of a mass revolutionary overcoming of capitalism in the state, how could we organize our domestic lives? Okay. I'm trying to jump ahead to a slide. It's not quite working. Here it is. Okay. In my article in Pinko, I draw from the French utopian socialist Charles Fourier in suggesting that one possible revolutionary overcoming of both class society and the family form. I argue that during periods of insurrection, we can witness examples of collective reproduction. Think of a protest kitchen on a barricade.
Collective reproduction. Think The Giver. Think Brave New World. Think Logan's Run. Think 1984. They were doing this with artificial insemination. They called it artsem. Collective reproduction means that there are no more biological children born, and that all children are going to be born via a surrogate of some sort, to include these birthing pods or possibly incubating them in brain dead bodies. I wrote an article about it for my Substack. That's a real thing. And that the state will assign the child to the family.
Or in a building occupation that prefigure a more collective post-revolutionary way of organizing domestic reproduction. I suggest the commune, born in insurrection, as the basic unit of day-to-day social reproduction, consumption, and material survival. I recently completed a co-authored science fiction novel about such a revolutionary scenario, entitled Everything for Everyone, An Oral History of the New York Commune, 2052 to 2072. The novel will appear this coming August with Common Notions. In the visions of family abolition I point to in the novel and in Pinko, people can and do form parenting units where one or more other adults and may live together in a cluster of rooms or home, but these are embedded in a broader unit of social reproduction and consumption, a commune, on the scale of a few hundred people who collectively cook, eat, debate, socialize, and make collective decisions on consumption as part of a broader communist society. Here, family may be an effective unit of care, but because conception and social reproduction is not through private households, one choice to form a family has no direct bearing on your material conditions. All this prior work on family abolition led me to begin last year on a nonfiction book for Pluto Press. It will appear in 2023 and will be titled Family Abolition,
Oh, good.
Capitalism and the
It's
Communizing
got a book
of
coming
Care.
out. Isn't that nice?
This book, partially following my research agenda on family abolition, moves from the current crisis of working class households back through a periodization of family abolition politics over the last 2 centuries, and then into sketching
Notice
the
it has the trans
theoretical
colors
qualities
as the
of a
cover.
possible post-revolutionary future of communist social reproduction. While I was pursuing this research agenda, family abolition began to grow as a visible and vibrant current of social thought.
There's
There has been a
Sophie.
string of excellent theoretical contributions. In addition to the work of Jules and Daniel, I'm also very excited about Sophie Lewis's book, due out this fall, published by Verso. Sophie has done more than anyone else in clearing the collective space for raising, again, family abolition as a critical horizon and theoretical tradition. Over the course of this research on family abolition, I completed a largely unrelated PhD on queer social movements, facing a dismal academic job market, and drawing on my prior professional career as a social worker, my long-standing personal analysis, and my amateur passion for Lacan and Freud, I decided to pursue training as a psychoanalyst. In the final months of my dissertation 2 years ago, I found employment at a private practice psychotherapy clinic, built a full caseload of mostly other trans patients, and enrolled in one of New York's various psychoanalytic training institutes.
This person is counseling trans people. I wonder if this person is counseling trans kids. I wonder how young the patient threshold is.
I am now 2 years into this psychoanalytic training. Obviously, psychoanalysis has a great deal to say about the family, but how to bridge my research in communist theory on the family with my deepening engagement with psychoanalytic theory and clinical technique are questions I'm just beginning to dive into. As I do, I'm encountering many moments of anti-communism, transphobia, and anti-intellectualism amongst fellow psychoanalytic clinicians.
Notice how this person basically conflated anti-communism and transphobia. I mean, maybe not conflated, that's the wrong, but she said them back to back. So that to me says that she puts them kind of like in the same category.
I've also much more recently encountered a vibrant community of psychoanalytic theorists excited to think critically about the family. Hannah Zevin and Alex Coulson recently recruited me to help co-edit a new magazine of psychoanalytic theory called Parapraxis. Their plan for the first issue was The Problem of the Family. I'm co-editing, along with Hannah, the first section, bringing together the feature section of the first issue, bringing together a range of critical theorists, activists, and clinicians to think about psychoanalysis as a critique of the myth of the family and place it in dialogue with work grappling with the family as a capitalist institution, as a site of racist state violence, and as a nexus of gender and sexual domination. We recently commissioned our first issue. We also recently announced and quickly filled registration for a seminar series on the problem of the family. I'm very excited to see where my thinking leads as I begin to grapple with questions like those raised by this event and Tut's book, engaging psychoanalytic theory and clinical practice with revolutionary communist work, seeking to overcome the family form. How am I doing on time? Okay. In closing, I want to read a passage from the book on family abolition I am currently in the midst of writing. The yearnings to go beyond the family preserves the care that people seek and sometimes find in families. Yet these efforts also unleash that care into new forms, new practices, and new relationships. The forms of love present in the best families are not destroyed in the struggle to move beyond the family, but broadened, generalized, and made universal. Family abolition is this care beyond the family, extended through the whole of society, a process made possible through deep revolutionary change. Family abolition is the expansion and generalization of relations of care and consensual interdependency. Family abolition is a commitment that no one should be without support, that everyone should have the freedom to find ways of loving and caring without coercion. The coercion of the family takes many forms, including interpersonal violence.
The coercion of the family. So I saw a question. How do these freaks explain the natural anthropological existence of the family? They think that it has all been coerced in order to support capitalism, essentially.
The blackmail of necessary care that is conditionally given, or an access to basic material necessities like food, housing, and healthcare. A free society is one where people are able to form intimate relations without these forms of coercion. This requires abolishing the family as a material institution. The abolition of the family cannot happen in a society dominated by capitalism and its racist states. It can only happen as
Did you hear that? Capitalism and its racist states. Now, answer me this, riddle me this, Batman. Why would someone conflate capitalism and racism? Capitalism and its racist states. They said that that family abolition cannot happen without under capitalism and its racist states. Why are those things conflated? Could it be that whenever they say racism or white supremacy or whiteness, they really mean capitalism? Just anytime you're watching videos like this, pay attention to all the times where they use the term capitalism and racism, or capitalism and white supremacy, or capitalism and whiteness, or any derivation thereof. Pay attention to when they use them interchangeably, because it's pretty much every time.
one dimension of a broader collective liberation. Overcoming of the coercive family form is one essential dimension of human emancipation. Family abolition is the dimension of this liberation as it unfolds in our interpersonal relationships, in how we reproduce ourselves, in how we love and are loved. Only in the shared movement can family abolition be a form of expanded freedom. Thank you, everyone.
That was such a wonderful talk. I know we're all incredibly excited for those two book projects. I'm gonna let Daniel pick up. I know that's a very hard act to follow, Daniel. So
very hard.
Apologies.
Thank you, Cordelia.
Daniel
Thank
is
you,
new. We've never
Michelle,
seen Daniel
Jules,
before.
and to everyone.
This is exciting.
Good afternoon,
a new
good
family
evening,
abolitionist.
wherever this finds you in the world. I cannot follow that wonderful slideshow and very precise presentation. I can try to just give you some of my notes that sparked in my mind. Just my mind has been racing after learning of being invited to be a part of this event, for which I'm extremely honored. And I hope everyone can get a chance to support the various organizations that have put this together. And I believe in their missions very, very much. And it's just really an honor to be with you. So what I thought I would do is sort of give you a bit of extemporaneous thoughts here, a little bit of psychoanalytic theory, a little bit of considerations about what psychoanalysis is good for when we think about the kind of most originary of the communist demands that doesn't really come from the Communist Manifesto. It has a prehistory in utopian socialism. One could argue that in the Middle Ages, there was certainly peasant revolts, which centered something even more radical. I'm thinking here of the movement of the Free Spirits in France. I'm thinking of the Valdesian peasant revolt. all of the peasant revolts that led to the establishment of the Franciscan order, which was itself a kind of bourgeois imitation of proletarian peasant uprising, which is a whole other story and saga. But I think that the notion of the overcoming of the family form predates capitalism, although there's not much research on that. I think that the impulse of Engels to look at the peasant revolts in his text on this, Luther and Munzer and their debates during the time of Protestant Reformation, gave birth during the Second and Third International, gave birth to a lot of very interesting communist theorizing about pre-capitalist forms of revolt and of revolution. And I just want to say that, one of the greatest places to begin for a militant communist orientation to using psychoanalysis as a weapon, as a tool for revolutionary struggle is in a recently translated book by Brill.
Why would you use psychoanalysis as a tool or a weapon? That seems unethical on like 17 different levels.
Through the HM series, by a figure who is called Leon Rosichner. And he wrote a book called Freud and the Limits of Bourgeois Individualism. I'm going to reference a few of his ideas in my limited time here, and also reference a few thoughts that I've developed in my own book. And thank you for referencing my book, Michelle and Cordelia, because, I think that Freud, according to Rosichner and according to some socialist readers of psychoanalysis, including Frankfurt School, although we should remember perhaps a bit of a surprise when we think about Frankfurt School, apropos the family, in the sense that they also, especially Horkheimer, actually saw certain form of rationalism that was produced, a certain mode of handling social and political authority that was produced in the bourgeois family form. And they saw that not late capitalism, that's a dirty word, but they saw the direction of capitalist development after the Second World War as producing conditions of a crisis of Oedipality, such that those conditions would harm political solidarities, would harm communist organizing at a libidinal familial level. In other words, they saw something, and this goes to Michelle's point about the notion of abolition as sublation. There are elements in the bourgeois family that I think must be wrestled with and retained. A. B, there are crisis points in the disintegration of the bourgeois family form, which lead to deleterious superegoic and Oedipal crises that actually harm our capacity as militants organizing across classes. One of the very interesting things I realized in the last 30 years is the proliferation of assortative marriage, which means people marrying and having partners inside of their own class. Okay, that's an interesting fact, maybe harmless, but I think if we look at the history of revolutionary struggles, I do think that actually cross-class collaboration, cross-class communication, cross-class solidarity cannot be reduced to a kind of petty bourgeois thing, because we have to understand that the social.
Is anyone else feeling lost right now with what this guy is talking about? Because I truly have no idea. I'm just going to wait a second for the chat to respond. I don't know what this guy is talking about. Is it just me? Yeah. Okay. Well, Akshay got a bingo, so there's something there. Yeah. Okay. So it looks like more than one people are lost. So we're just gonna let this play out. This has to happen sometimes. Yes, I got this one. He's saying people have to marry within the same class level or shouldn't marry within the same class level. I don't get it. Like, he seemed to be rather surprised that people were marrying within their class level, but I don't think that's actually really surprising, because it just reflects the people that you're around. Like, you're most likely to marry someone that you're around because that's how you develop relationships with people. So I don't think that people marrying within their class level is like that out of bounds.
Socialists who ascribe to a kind of moderate social democracy have a tendency to accuse family abolitionists as being kind of petty bourgeois utopian dreamers. And if you study Eli Zaretsky's work on capitalism, he makes this point in the American context of early turn of the century, early 20th century socialist feminists. They did two things which ended up backfiring in their advocacy for women's rights. Of course, as we know, the advocacy was for autonomy away from the proletarian family for women in the sphere of wage labor, which was achieved. The other irony is that a lot of the intellectuals on the left, including the socialist and Marxist left, advocated for a conception of the family which centered adolescence as the ideal. Now, fast forward to our own post-70s hyper-capitalist structure, we are experiencing what many refer to, and I follow as well, as what we might call the kind of crisis over adulthood, or the crisis over a kind of, and even Adorno in the culture industry was obsessed with this notion as well. And he actually linked it to a post-nuclear age sense of collective traumatization. And he saw, especially in fascist states, that adolescence is elevated to an impossible ideal. And there's a certain danger that the familialization of society and the elevation of adolescence does. On the one hand, it creates a society in which growing old is seen as a shameful act. It creates a society in which our elders' wisdom, even militant elders, etc., across the political spectrum, is completely deprivileged, devalued. And this is our society that we live in now. So it creates these kind of a crisis over ideals. Now, one of the thinkers that I do turn to, albeit very carefully, is Christopher Lasch. The reason I say I turn to his thought carefully is because I think his politics ended up becoming in a kind of mimetic rivalry with the socialist feminists of the New Left in ways which didn't really end well, to be honest. And there are elements not of social democracy in Lasch, but even of neoconservatism. I will admit this. However, I think like most liberal thinkers, or aristocratic even, or reactionary possibly. I'm writing a book right now about Nietzsche, for Christ's sake. There are elements of the conceptual
aristocrat
apparatus that thinkers give to us that we can use, but I think it becomes an ethical question of how precisely to use them. So what was Lasch's position on the question of the family? Well, Lasch's view, in short, I would characterize as operating on a model whereby late capitalism, finance capitalism, the early trappings of neoliberalism, we're creating the conditions in which the family is facing a fundamental incapacity. Almost in a weird paradoxical sense, the family is returning to what Zaretsky refers to as the birth of subjectivity. He makes a beautiful argument, Zaretsky does, which Lasch follows, and which I think
does
we
that
should all
mean?
basically accept historically, which is that the proletarian family, and of course the Black proletarian family is essentially a part of this, gives us the modern conditions of subjectivity because it experimented itself, albeit what it was given as a family form from the bourgeois family, with a form of leisure, with a form of minimal leisure, of self-making, of self-reinvention and struggle and toil, which was not necessarily outside of the value form, but which was kind of, let's say, a kind of compromised haven in a heartless world. Now, what's interesting is the dialectic of what happens on the left and the way that the left and the liberals communicate calls for family abolition. And this is what I refer to as a concept of what I call paradox of liberation, which is both a material question of any liberation movement as well as a rhetorical question that I think is at the heart of the discursive dimension of calls of militant family abolition, which must.
Okay, I'm sorry. What the fuck is wrong with this guy? Can you imagine? And I say this as someone with like a literal PhD. Can you imagine talking like this guy? I cannot even, like, this is not how normal people communicate at all. And this guy has probably spent, I'm sure he's very intelligent. I'm not going to take that away from him. He's memorized a lot of stuff. Okay, fine. But this guy has probably spent thousands and thousands and thousands of hours learning how to talk like this. And no one even knows what exactly he's saying. So this is where watching socialism gets hard, guys. Just, we need to push through. I know this is confusing. There's nothing I can do about it because he's not saying anything of substance. And I wish I could do more commentary and teach more, but like, he's saying nothing. Yes, exactly. This is peak midwit right here. This is a midwit.
Be careful around co-optation. Because in what sense? Well, we already know from the experience of the New Left, in the new spirit of capitalism, which I think is an argument that most of you should be familiar with.
What is it?
Chiapella and Boltanski.
What is it?
You know, they make this kind of by now cliched argument that the New Left reproduced. And of course, Foucault is to blame, according to some, although that's a whole other thing. The slogans, the demands, the core libidinal basis of the revolutionary upheavals of 68, etc., found a home within corporate business literature, right? There was a kind of transposition there.
What?
So I think that family abolition needs to humble itself. We as militants need to humble ourselves in recognition that our ideas are taken seriously. You see the point? And as such, we need to kind of build into our thinking that potential of co-optation on the one hand. On the other hand, to reference psychoanalytic theory for a moment, one of the big ways that we can understand the status of the family today, in my view, is by reference to a concept which you see in Freud, but which is really developed more by the Marxists that read Freud, which is that for Freud, the individual mommy, daddy, me family unit, right, of the bourgeois family.
Did Marxists generally subscribe to Freud? Is that a thing? Because I've always liked Jung better than Freud, so I just don't pay attention to Freud that much. Because that would actually make a lot of sense if Marxists generally subscribe to Freud.
Is the kind of link to what Freud calls superego. And that, of course, it is the presence of the father who instantiates that adhesion, that libidinal cathexis. So when the psychoanalysts today are speaking
Tinge
of a
says
society
yes.
which is in crisis over Oedipus, or which I'm sure is a phrase that you've heard, one of the big debates that I track, and I think that is worth discussing, is, are we pre-Oedipal? Are we post-Oedipal? Are we in a crisis of Oedipus? Well, what exactly is Oedipus? Would be one place to start. And here I would define it as follows.
Thank God.
Oedipus is a drama having to do with the constitutive work and labor involved with working through ambivalent paternal identifications and attachments, which are also unconscious. As such, we can envision a society in which families, and this is an argument that the Japanese philosopher Kojun Karatani develops in his reading of Freud, which I also follow, makes the argument in a quite beautiful, precise way that late capitalism, finance capitalism, consumer capitalism, if you like, is superego deprived. In other words, there's a kind of delinking of the superegoic mechanism and its relay system to the other form of the superego that Freud identifies, which is sometimes called the collective or social superego.
Oh, that's why they
And
like Freud.
In a way, what that means is that the side of the family becomes riddled with a profound apoliticism. In other words, the question I think that we need to ask ourselves is, yes, some kind of abolition of the family qua class formation, absolutely. But furthermore, what in fact could we do as a precondition to revolutionize the family that we have now? And for that, I try to suggest that we need to experiment in what I call the commune form. Now, the New Left era, and of course, going back to the utopian socialists, had experimented with such a arrangement. We have a history, we have a playbook on this. One of the things I think that's important is to understand the status of paternal authority within any experimentation in commune living. What do I
It's
mean by that?
taking every fiber of my being.
Basically, I think that we on the left need to be able to speak about the crisis of paternity and the crisis of the authority of the father. I think it's well known that something has been downgraded, obviously, in the father's authority. Yes and no. It's too difficult for me to say that as a total statement, but nonetheless, it is a tendency for which this social or collective superego has a tendency in a pre-Oedipal society in general, such that subjects wish to invent or to create a monstrous other figure to stand in for the absence of the more local superegoic father. That then becomes an animating gesture of fascist politics, Bolsonaro, Trump, etc.
What the fuck?
There's many
Wait,
languages
wait,
and
wait. How did he get the absence of the father leads to fascist politics like Bolsonaro and Trump? How did Well, right. But like but but conservatives are more likely to stay in the home, aren't they? Yeah, I was thinking like it's exactly the opposite of that. The absence of the father is going to be more likely to lead to like this commune nonsense. Wow.
theoretical lineages that we could pull from to articulate the necessity of a pre-Oedipal society to construct monstrous fathers. But what would it look like for a radical alternative to the family to handle the question of the father well? What would it mean? I mean, one of the beauties of Lacan, and Cordelia, tell me if I'm almost done here, and I am almost done. One of the beauties of Lacan is that he
Thank
tried to
God.
invent a way around this in the sense of what he called the pluralization of the father function, which is that, yes, there is an elemental Oedipal overcoming
Apparently
in the familial
so.
network. Yes. But there is also a kind of more constant Oedipal process which follows the subject throughout their life. And by that, we mean that the Oedipal function has to do with the invention of a new desire. It has to do with initiating the subject into and out of the family. Like, in other words, there is a way in which we could flip the Deleuze and Guattari anti-Oedipal framework towards a more liberated framework, such that if we are really facing conditions of pre-Oedipality, what might it look like to invent alternatives to fatherly care, to fatherly presence that assist subjectivity in ways which are more thorough and which push the subject beyond this kind of negative dependency for which, yes, there's love. Yes, there's compassion. Yes, there's abuse. There's violence. There's horror. We know that what that dependency looks like. And one of the insights that Freud gives us is that the experience of being a child is the only time in your life where you never rebel because you're in a state of pure dependence. And then he says something beautiful, which is that society constructs and reproduces and replicates that form of infantile dependency in what he calls artificial groups, the church, the army,
They want
etc.
them to be dependent.
And that's what we talk about when we say society is structured around Oedipus, you see? And why
No.
we must overcome it. Why we must overcome it. Why we must overcome these forms of dependency, not in a libertarian way, but in a way committed to a more thorough form of liberation. And I think that the
definitely not in a libertarian way. That no, don't go over. No, not with those crazy right wingers. We don't want to do this in a libertarian way. We want to do it in a communist way.
Marxist and communist vision is the only way that such a vision could ever be lived up to. So hopefully I haven't gone over time, Cordelia. Do I have more time, or am I good?
You have 6 more minutes.
Oh, okay. Now I got all of my passionate stuff out of the way. So let me let me take a step back and just say a couple more things then. I want to say a few things more about this notion of
I don't know if I would make it
discourse
through
and
6 more
rhetoric,
minutes. I don't know.
because I think that in our culture today, we are perceived in ways which box us into a certain superegoic formation. And if there really is these two forms of superego, this kind of local, contingent, familial form that emerges, we should understand militant work as producing its own superego. Now, Mark Fisher, in one of the last things he wrote, came up with this notion that I think is quite interesting. And I wonder if you all agree. There's many things in Fisher which I'm not fully committed to, but let's just follow this line for a second. He said, on the militant left, there's two forms of superego that compete with each other, because one of the other things of our society, of an Oedipalized society, is that unconsciously we have an allegiance to authority figures, which we can't adequately touch. And we rather rival with ourselves. So we on the left rival with each other. And he said there's two forms that it takes. He calls a militant, ascetic, Leninist superego, which defers questions of the revolution of everyday life, questions of familial organization, etc. Defers that to an after point, after the revolution, versus another model of superego, which he calls cultural unconscious, for which he's working with the American socialist feminist Ellen Wills. It's a quite nice idea, which is that a conscious recognition that this domain that we are speaking of links us politically, socially, aesthetically to the vital unconscious thread which we all share in common. And that this is the site of the revolution of everyday life, because we're not merely talking about just this one institution of the family that needs to be overcome. We're talking about what are the preconditions for a conception of political organization that would be committed to the overcoming of the status quo as such. By me saying that, we also have to recognize that that involves the class conversation. And I think one of the areas of research, as I mentioned before, has to do with centering what it means to have a working class family life in existence today. And that's one of the things I try to track in my book, right? But I think that Fisher's impulse about this competition on the left, and I'm not sure that that dichotomy is the right one. But nonetheless, I think that there's something about that. And I think that we've all seen this. I saw it in my participation in Occupy. I think that there's a kind of way in which psychoanalysis can give us a language, give us a theoretical framework for thinking about ways to overcome these divisions that we naturally put ourselves into, because every time we revolt, we also create a new set of ideals. And we need to be honest about the kind of ideals that we're creating in our experimentations with changing the society. And when we're doing that, I think psychoanalysis basically humbles us in a certain sense. And I think that we should treat psychoanalytic truths as humbling truths, because ultimately these are truths having to do with matters which are very much out of our control, our autonomy, and so on. If anyone's done analysis, you'll know what comes up. You'll know. And let me just say that, you know, it's been really nice to be a part of this. I really look forward to the discussion. And I'm just here. I have to pick up my kids in about an hour, but my mother's visiting from out of town, and she's looking for jobs on her phone up in my daughter's room. And it's really a blessing to be with you all, and I can't wait to have a conversation. I'll close there.
Thank you very
Thank
much for
God.
that,
Oh my
Daniel.
God.
I
Oh
know
my
anyone
God.
who hasn't already picked up a copy of your book will be looking for one.
No,
Um,
I will not be looking for
so I
one.
wanted to hand it over to
That was the
Jules,
hardest
and I
thing
wanted to
I've
say
ever
again,
watched in the 2 years
because I
I've been doing
forgot
this stuff.
to give it a shout out when I was introducing her earlier,
What was
Kindercom was
that?
probably the first thing I read that put some concrete meat and bones on family abolition as well. And I think it's really hard to understate its importance in the whole conversation we're having now. And so I'll let you take it over, Jules.
Transgender Marxism,
Thanks a lot,
yay!
Cordelia, for that
We've seen her before. She's
touching
crazy.
intro.
She's real crazy.
Also, it's a delight to be part of this event.
We've seen this one before. She edited a book called Transgender Marxism. We've seen her in the Queer Marxism lectures. She is the one that taught us that trans doesn't mean transition anymore. It means transform. She's the one that taught us about how communists and Marxists will use a certain type of testosterone as, like, if they go out, they use it like a drug, like a recreational drug. We're going to learn a lot from this one. It's going to, I promise, it's going to make up for the hell that we just sat through. I pray that's true.
With the Learning Collective and with Daniel and with Michelle. And I've really gotten a lot out of both of those talks, which I found especially helpful because I think there was a real historical dimension to both of them. And this talk is going to be a bit more 21st century strictly oriented, or even 2020 oriented. So I'm glad other people had that covered for me. So thanks a lot. This talk is called Yes, We Should Abolish the Family. What I'm going to do is introduce 5 related themes, and then I'm going to get into a rather extended response. So the second half of the talk is going to be a response to one of the few kind of good-natured, sincere reactions kind of to this, well, opposing this idea, which I found from the social democratic or democratic socialist left. So the ideas we're going to work through are
Hello, American
social
legend.
revolution, oikos and economy, or household economics rather, reaction, and reaction to what, negativity and provocation. So unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, my slideshow is not in operation. So I will do my best to recap as we go along and read things out very slowly. So what makes communist thought distinctive in my books is that it can't be satisfied by critique alone. So communist thought needs a speculative or a visionary moment to resolve itself. Michelle has already talked about her forthcoming sci-fi publication, and I think it's a striking feature of everyone I know who's published work on this topic, that we have a kind of overt and explicit interest in that type of writing. I can talk a bit more about this speculative moment and what I mean by it in the Q&A. But for the time being, when I bring up social revolution in relation to family abolition, this kind of draws on a long feature of the Marxian left, which, as I've said, I'm not really going to explore in any detail right now, but it suffices to say that there are, this is becoming my primary interest when it comes to Marxism over the years, more and more, because it's occurred to me that, especially I used to be primarily associated with a tendency within Marxist feminist theory known as social reproduction theory, and contrastingly, the idiom of a lot of opposing Marxists refers more to social domination. But really, I see like either of these two terms, social reproduction, social domination, as not really meaning a lot unless they're connecting into some kind of strategic impetus towards kind of like social revolution. So I guess I'm just going to reference one thing quickly for people who don't know what I'm talking about at all at this point, and then maybe you can explore it at your own leisure. So the best book length exploration of the idea I found is George Commonell's Emancipation and Alienation in the Works of Karl Marx. So I've written a review of it for Tribune magazine, and yeah, this kind of explores the particularly the development of like social revolution as a concern that followed on from the French Revolution, and seeing political revolutions as kind of an insufficient breakthrough. So the thing with political revolutions is they are ostentatious and overt and visible, but really the relational aspects don't necessarily get transformed. So when it comes to family abolition, the point is that really sort of one is required for another. Like, it's difficult to conceive of the sort of social relational transformations we want to achieve without some kind of basic transformation to the household. So this brings us on to the second point, which is like the oikos and economic, household management. And I suppose one of the reasons it's occurred to me that abolish the family is kind of the thing we settled on is other formulations have a sort of jargonistic aspect. So especially this appears when we talk about private households and their development. So so private households is probably more strictly what I'm interested in abolishing, and especially the different ways which
private households is what she's specifically interested in abolishing. So let's just keep that in mind. So not necessarily the family, but the private household, which is going to be kind of like the same thing as the biological family, because again, these people see the biological family as private property.
They've played out ruling class ideologies not only throughout capitalist history, but also prior to it. So so when it comes to this topic, I guess I'm just going to read you out something. Well, I'm going to read you out some. I'm going to repeat myself, I guess. So increasingly, like the thinking I've been doing has been informed by a thinker, Angela Mitropoulos, who I'm going to read out a passage from the introduction of Transgender Marxism, which is where we refer to where myself and Al O'Rourke, my co-editor, sort of introduced this set of ideas. So let me read this out. So capitalist society turns on what Angela Mitropoulos has analyzed as the organization of predictable economic and genealogical ordering, the nexus of race, gender, class, and sexuality, as well as nation, constituted through the premise of the properly productive household, she says. While this is a truly tangled and mutable arrangement, it is always imagined as a natural order. To grasp the process at work, we cannot set aside questions of convention, the salto mortale, that aleatory leap across contingency that is necessary for the valorization of capital, finds its unavoidable foundations in the assertion, formalization, and contractualization of genealogical ties and dependencies, and the norms, laws, conventions, epistemological claims, and moral philosophies that naturalize them. From Aristotle to Ricardo, Malthus to Polanyi, Smith to Hayek, the annals of political economy recurrently constitute the ideal market citizen through a series of racialized, gendered, and sexualized exclusions. So this is the kind of like framework, this is the kind of perception of the household, and it's kind of like, especially the key point here, I suppose, is that the household is not only a focus of ruling class or the ideology, but also it's clearly a means, an institutional means for these things to be developed and to be played out. So this is why we see in right-wing opinions, let's say, the household appearing in a particular way. And one aspect of right-wing thinking on the family is that they don't seem to have the kind of like uncertainty and lack of clarity that progressives often run into. They have a very clear picture about what they mean by a family, and this is something which is very useful for them. So this kind of brings us into the third point, which is the question of political reaction, and reaction to what is kind of my my big question. So this is like a riff on this Ian Hacking social construction. So Ian Hacking always says with social construction, well, social construction of what? What is being constructed? What is the endpoint? And I feel like when we consider the current insurgent tide of the political right, which we see in the United States, and the rather less the more institutionalized at this point form this has taken in countries like Britain, Russia, Poland, and Hungary, we have to, which are all basically one-party states at this point, in large part due to this kind of binding household-oriented ideology. So when we're considering both the insurgent and institutionalized forms, we have to kind of consider what exactly is what is the point of reaction? What is the impetus for this kind of thing? And what I'm going to argue today, but I can't really prove to you, and we can discuss further in the Q&A, is that there's not only some kind of perceived destabilization of household norms, it's not only a matter of ideological fantasy on the part of the right wing, but that there is clearly some sort of objective breakdown of the kind which Daniel was talking about, perhaps one which extends even further than merely paternal authority. And especially on any demographic measurement you care to look at, the operation of this economia, as Mitropoulos would put it, has not continued to function in recent generations in the way we might expect. So, so that's the kind of hopeful.
I think we're going to get a lot more out of this once they start the discussion and the Q&A. So this is like their little preamble. They're going to show off how smart they are. But like typically when we get into the discussion, the Q&A, they have to go more off the cuff and they start sounding more like actual human beings. So guys, hang in there. We're almost there. I don't know that we've gained a lot from the first half of this presentation, but hopefully we will in the back half.
Hopeful sounding news for revolutionaries. But this kind of follows through into my next stage, which is that the reason we talk about abolition is because we need a certain negativity at this moment.
Oh, so they're admitting they want to generate negativity around the family. All right.
I suppose when they say like we need a certain negativity with abolition, I'm aware of like ongoing disputes and back and forths, and especially basically a lot of this discussion comes down to like German philology. Like there's a lot of discussion about this exact sublation Aufheben term and exactly like what was meant by it by Hegel and Marx and so on. But I think like even kind of taking the most hopeful view of abolition, which is possible, which is often something I find from Black feminists and especially prison abolitionists, people focused on law enforcement and so on. The argument which those thinkers, who are often enough Marxists, have made with great clarity is that we have to conceive of abolition as an undoing of injury, as like a reversal of criminalization and the community destruction which that has wrought across North America. So on the one hand, I think this is true, like this is clearly the correct orientation, that's what we've got to do. But on the other hand, I think abolition as it exists in English clearly does have this negative aspect, which kind of we have to lean into rather than sort of like deny is there. So, so the negativity is kind of like twofold in the kind of work that I've done, especially with Cade. And also it's something which I just want to explain as follows. So firstly, we have a pessimism about heterosexual families as something which can be redeemed or easily replaced, or yeah, basically the question of redemption. Like we don't like reformation is not something we really
so they are completely opposed to heterosexual families, which kind of goes along with Emmy O'Brien's thing in the beginning when. And again, I don't know her gender. I'm going to say her, I guess. I don't know what the pronouns are. I have no idea. But like Emmy O'Brien at the beginning was talking about how they have like a non-traditional household and like, you know, kids within a non-traditional household. And now she's talking about how they don't think that the heterosexual family is redeeming. So they want to create, and Emmy O'Brien talked about this too. They want to create like these trans communes, which, see, it's all coming back around now, which actually makes sense because, and I've talked about this and we actually learned this from her presentation like several months ago. They don't want the gender binary to exist. They don't want men, they don't want women, they don't want mothers, they don't want fathers. Okay, they want to completely abolish the gender binary in general. They want everyone to be non-binary. They want a world full of theys. And so it makes sense that they need to attack the heterosexual family because you can't create a world full of theys when you have heterosexual families. All right, we came around. All right, I'm tracking now.
Evolve as possible in the current circumstances or any conceivably imaginable circumstances. But also, also I have a certain skepticism towards the forms of resistant kinship and how far those can take us, because a lot of people have a rather more optimistic stance towards alternative frameworks of care and how far those can really resolve things. And there's two reasons which I think we can't rely on those, which I suppose I've elaborated on before, but I'll just recap now. The first one is that the amount of damage being done by private households and heterosexual relations there within is basically like infinite. Like it's always going to be a matter of like putting out fires and catching up. So that's the first problem. And the second problem is that these like alternative institutions or resistant networks or whatever we want to call them will only really succeed insofar as they are succeeding at producing people readied for the kind of coercive relations of capital. So those are like my two reasons for pessimism there. So this is why like a certain dose of negativity is kind of needed in
Oh
our
yeah,
abolition.
these people are not
So,
Christians.
fittingly enough,
They're
my
not
final
Christians at all,
my
in any
final
way.
creative me point before I move on to responding to people is provocation. So I'll be really quick with this one. So basically the reason I think that I talk about abolition and the reason it's worth however many however much like flack and negative attention and let's say creative accusations it's drawn towards me, is that I think theory just needs to be unsettling, and this is kind of the key point. Theory needs to like unsettle and disturb, and this is I've heard this within the Marxist tradition, argued most succinctly by Assad Haider. There's one piece on like what theory is for by him, which I recommend checking out. But again, like I think this provocation, this like unsettling aspect kind of has it's kind of got two faces, right? So the positive face is that you often end up getting surprised by the kind of the number of people and who the people are who've been through this process of like dispossession and injury from families or private households. But secondly, there's kind of like a negative face, which is also like very beneficial as well. And that's that often you have people who are sort of loosely culturally left-ish, let's say, who suddenly turn against you. And this is something which is very valuable to know if you're a social revolutionary, because ultimately, if it wasn't going to be the family, it would be something equivalent to it. You see what I mean? It's like sooner or later, you have this parting of ways which happens. And often I think it's best to do that sooner. So this brings us on to my final section. And this is where I'm really sorry I don't have a screen presentation, because like I'll try and read out these quotes very slowly, but also I'm reading something which is available online. So if you want to go on your browsers and get it open, that's fine. So I'm going to talk about a piece called "Should We Abolish the Family" from 2019, which is by a democratic British socialist called Tom Wyman. Yeah, and I really love this piece because a great proportion of the reactions or the responses to family abolition have been kind of nakedly dismissive, or like let's say totally dismissed it out of hand in a way which I find informative in its own right, but haven't really given us anything to work with. But Wyman's piece is quite a contrast and quite a remarkable bit of writing. So as I say, you can find it in the outline. It's freely available online, so do feel free to check it out as I'm talking. So Wyman's piece is primarily a response to Sophie Lewis's book, Full Surrogacy Now, Feminism Against Family. I suppose the family is also against feminism, but there we go. So Wyman is particularly interested in Sophie's cuckold's dilemma, as I call it. This moment in the book,
Cuckold's
in
dilemma?
the introduction, where Lewis recalls that she had an interaction with their father, where they kind of scoffingly brought up the notion that they would be dispossessed or whatever, or like in any way that they would in any way be less their father's child, were it to turn out that he was not biologically their actual sire. At which point, Lewis's father turns stony-faced and clearly responds in silence in such a way that he wouldn't really consider this relationship to be continuing. So Wyman reproduces this anecdote and I think very, very fairly reconstructs Lewis's argument towards abolition, the strategic claim, before performing this remarkable pivot. So
I just want to pause there because, you know, Sophie Lewis is not in this presentation, but we have watched Sophie Lewis many times. And I think it's pretty clear to me that the reason that Sophie Lewis is all about family abolition is because she's pissed off at her own family. And because she's pissed off at her own family, and we just heard the story, like the cuckold dilemma, like if you turn out not to be mine, I'm going to disown you, sort of thing. Even after like the child is like, you know, growing up, they've had a relationship for a long time, like she's pissed at her family. That's why she's pushing family abolition. I don't know how much more clear it can be. She literally writes about it in the introduction of her book.
He pivots towards saying that this is kind of like a nauseating set of ideas on another level. So while he can nod along quite reasonably on the emotional level, his response is something quite different. So intriguingly, this essay at this point, I was sure, seemed set to go down like a psychoanalytic bent. In fact, Wyman compares his visceral reaction to that of a Brexit voter who says, you know, I know it's bad, but I want it. So this essay seems to sort of be making the beats that would lead it towards a psychoanalytic conclusion, insofar as it's establishing this realm of the irrational, which is beyond actual logical justification. But rather than doing
Thank
this,
you,
Wyman
Jen. I
actually
appreciate
pivots
it.
once again and introduces Hegel, who, of course, as history of thought nerds will know, is one of the most prominent rationalists and indeed an irritant for social theory on exactly that basis. So we have the irrational back to rationalism, and especially a figure of patriarchal authority swinging in a very interesting way. So not only does he introduce Hegel, he also shifts to discussing one of the most notoriously conservative texts by that thinker, the philosophy of right. So Wyman, in fairness, is not oblivious to this, the kind of harsh qualities of this text, and he doesn't make an apologia for it exactly. He even quotes Hegel as saying that the aim of parenting is breaking the child's self-will, which of course is pretty much what I think most family abolitionists wouldn't go that far. But this is then reframed as contingent entirely on the philosophy of right being written in 1820. So this opens up for me an interesting historical point, sadly, back to the 19th century. This kind of leaves me wondering at what point in Wyman's construction of things, the family structure undergoes some kind of ontological reformation and ceases to be about the destruction or constraint of self-will. Nevertheless, I'm largely in agreement with the kind of Hegelian position which he outlines, which is that the family simultaneously presents a point of restraint and liberation, and exactly that it's hard to conceive of any kind of distancing or moving beyond the family, which doesn't imminently arise out of it. Now, I had another point here about the family and education, which I think I'm going to skip over for reasons of time. But long story short, like a beloved comrade of mine, Alyssa Adamson, has written a whole thesis on queer spirit and Hegel. So if you want to know more about education
Queer
and family
spirit.
and those things, please do check it out. But the gist of it is that in this essay, Wyman establishes the family as one of the key bases of recognition. So one of the places we become ourselves, which of course, like as family abolitionists, this is exactly something we agree with and something that makes it such an interesting and illuminating target for social revolutionary activity. But then finally, there is an interesting treatment of biology in this essay, which I think actually doesn't come from Hegel at all. But nevertheless, I'm going to read it out to you. And if you've got it up on your screens, that's even better. Right, so Wyman says, an ideal, healthy, maximally loving family life may not be possible, but I've still always longed to start one. When my son was born, he was drawn to his mother for irrational biological reasons, although not necessarily one ship. He recognizes her smell from her months long gestating him. Her breast milk tastes like the amniotic fluid which he drank in the womb, the taste of everything he has ever known. It would make no sense to conceive of this beautiful, demanding little worm as anything remotely resembling property, but I still wouldn't obviously want to choose for him to be raised by anyone else save me and his mother. Further, he would be unable to make such a choice. Days-old baby do not make these kinds of choices. The decision to set oneself against your primary caregiver can only be made against the background
Ben, it's
of
good
however
to see
your
you. I hope you're
caregivers
doing well.
happen to have formed you.
Fun fact, guys, this guy here, Benjamin Pratt, he's a very, very talented magician, and he performed at my wedding. So I hope you're doing well, my friend. Savrits, we need to have our deep dive on everything. Ain't that the truth, Savrits? We've been talking about that for a long time. Ain't that the truth? I would love to make that happen.
So, I'm kind of unsure about reactions to this, which I'm going to get, because on the one hand, I think perhaps some of you listening might find this reasoning convincing. Some of you may recoil from it. Some of you perhaps have a mixture of both. But I found it especially striking because, as frank as it seems to be, it also seems to offer no reply to Lewis whatsoever, because Lewis's moment is one of realizing paternal love's strict conditionality. So the potentiality or the potential outcome of being rejected by one's parents. And this kind of switches exactly 180 degrees to the child's rejection of the parent. The validation of maternal biology is very interesting. It seems obviously in Hegelian terms very recognitive, like he is acknowledging the capacities which he lacks. But what actually also vanishes is the paternal biological involvement. That becomes completely unspoken. Indeed, this is the kind of key to avoiding the cuckold's dilemma, which Lewis poses. So it's actually not really a response. There's an avoidant aspect. So I'm going to close at this point because I think I've run already a minute over. But basically, the conclusion here is twofold. Firstly, social democrats are very interesting to argue with, and it's great for us to keep each other on our toes. So sometimes it's good to just say what we want, and then we can argue with them about why we can't have it. And their justifications are often a lot more illuminating than we expect they're going to be. And secondly, that family abolitionists are exactly those who don't flinch from seeing patriarchal relations as they are, or compromise in the answers which we offer to the accompanying dispossessions. So that's me. Thanks a lot.
God, thank God we
Thank
now
you
get
so
to have a
much for that,
discussion.
Jules. I
Thank
thought that was
God.
absolutely brilliant.
Oh my
I know
God, I need
I
this
and the
discussion so
audience have
bad.
some questions for you all.
Excellent.
But before we got to those, I wanted to take the time to ask if there are any questions or responses you might have for one another.
No.
Because I know a lot of the material in your panels, Daniel and Jules in particular, was novel, and I wanted to give you a chance to put what you posed in conversation. But that's a lot of pressure. So if not, we can go to audience questions.
I'm fine either way.
Yeah, I'm good either way. I mean, I could invite, if it's okay, Jules, to just say maybe a bit more about negation, negativity. In my work, I center the concept of, which comes from more recent French theory of what's called ultra-liberalism. And I've been really interested in this thesis that I talked about of pre-Oedipality as a culture of showing general symptoms of pre-Oedipality, and liberal ideology, and how a logic of revolt, how a logic of radical revolt, a logic of maximalist revolt gets captured by ultra-liberalism. And I wonder what you would say to that in a certain sense. Like, how would you fit the question of ideology, in which I take you to insist on the importance of, like, does that make sense? How might you
No.
address the question of political ideology, perhaps?
I would say that I'm relatively blasé about the threat of capture, definitely as far as like radical theorists on this topic. Yeah, I would definitely have to like engage with some more ultra liberal thought to give you a fully reasoned response to that. But
He doesn't
intuitively,
even know what he said.
intuitively, like I'm pessimistic about the big picture, the like macro picture about, as I say, like that there's a pessimism I've developed around alternative kinship, and I don't think it suffices. However, I think that it's beautiful and remarkable and very hard to keep up with. So I often think that people overestimate that grasp of things which are going on in places they don't fully have access to a lot of the time. So capture is really not really central to my vocabulary when I'm thinking through revolutionary changes. And that's probably quite an unusual feature about me, I feel. I think a lot of people are like happier sticking around in the register of critique than I normally am.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That makes sense. That's helpful. Yeah, that's very helpful.
I was struck by a subtle difference between how a couple of you all posed what I think ultimately were relatively compatible political demands. I know, Michelle, in your Pinko piece, you referred to the commune as a sort of form of social reproduction to replace the family explicitly. And I know, Daniel, in your book,
Pluto's
I
not
noticed,
as
um,
Marxist as
although you
Haymarket.
also
Haymarket's way better.
supported the Commune Forum, and I know you drew from Michelle's work politically, you described the Commune Forum as an alternative family forum. And I think for me, this seems as if it was based in the work's desire to ground what the family does psychoanalytically, its role in identification and initiation, rather than just the work of social reproduction and the work that the oikos does, as Jules put it. But I was curious if either of you feel there are any subtle distinctions between either the concept of supplanting the family entirely or the concept of this as an alternative, as a novel family form. Maybe you think this is purely semantic, but in any case, I wanted to hear maybe if it exposes any of the tensions in how you all frame what the family does.
Michelle, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I feel genuinely undecided on some level of what I understand of Tut's argument, that that I think there's certainly something that happens that is kind of nasty and frightening when we don't have any sense of internalized discipline or limits. That I'm really sort of interested in kind of a sense of ethical conduct in the world that engages some sense of adipality, some sense of like internalizing a sense of limits, and think about that a lot in my own life and political practice. And I think there's a truth to a kind of infinite cruelty that can emerge when one is kind of stuck in dyadic relations or sort of without I don't know, some kind of internalized adipality, and that I have no interest in sort of any nostalgia
Exactly,
for the father at all, right? Or any defense of the father at all. So if I
They hate
understand
men.
your argument,
I have never heard a family abolition thing where they're so hateful towards men. I don't get it. I mean, I wonder how the father on the panel thinks about, this person very clearly hating fathers and the other one too.
Daniel, which I might not, is that there's this wager that the father could be replaced by a kind of the commune on some level, that paternal, that the kind of name of the father adipality could be enabled.
That's a
And
good point.
I am quite, I feel very clear that I hate Lash's argument, but I feel uncertain about yours, your version of it. And I don't really have a clear, I think the level at which I agree with it is I imagine collective social life as playing a role in people internalizing a certain workable ego ideal and moderating the kind of cruelty of the superego. And that collective social life plays a role in childhood development, and that we, are not yet, it would be generations after the revolution to be able to really theorize that and see how it unfolds. We can only say very speculative things in some ways right now, but that on some level parallel to the importance of the Revolutionary Party historically in internalizing a sense of discipline, that kind of collective commitment to our shared emancipation might be a mode of internalizing that discipline. And all of this in my mind are sort of very speculative, very tentative, and fully compatible with what I feel very clear on, which is the complete eradication of the private household as an economic institution.
There it is.
Jules's comments over the years have been very helpful for me, that there is absolutely no political and moral basis on which we should ever defend private households as being determinant of people's material conditions. Like that.
Wow. There is no political or moral basis in which we should ever defend the private household. Wow. The bourgeoisie family, the patriarchy, the family where the man is seen as the head. Exactly, Akshay. Exactly.
Who you choose to parent with or have sex with or whatever should have
Yeah.
no effect on your access to material goods.
Yeah.
And like one answer to that is a sort of universal consolidation of social benefits through the state.
You will own nothing and
right?
you will
Like
be
a
happy.
Kollontai vision or something, and wage labor. And another vision is, something having to do with the commune, but that the household absolutely needs to be destroyed. And that I see no basis for defending it. The only basis for private households is class society and is the maintenance of capitalist social relations and the kind of horror of trying to figure out how to navigate labor markets as a basis of survival. And with the destruction of labor markets, we need to overcome private households as a social institution that structures people's material lives.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, nice work, Cordelia, for hitting that kind of that point of difference, which is, I think, important because I feel that the stakes of the question also pertain to the question of violence, in fact, subjective violence. And, I work with some psychoanalytic thinkers who are not necessarily nostalgic for the resurrection of the father or any kind of vulgar sense like that. I'm thinking like, Rene Girard and his work on mimetic desire theory, and Alain Badiou has also written a bit about forms of subjective life, which are what in Marxist thought we used to call lumpenproletariat. And I argue that, in a way, it's important that we revisit people for whom the family contract, to the extent we could even say that there is a family contract in neoliberalism, I think is a stretch. But to some extent, there is a kind of vague social arrangement there, or a set of expectations for which resentments and loss, and it's the kind of locus of class antagonism.
Do these people really think those things aren't going to happen in other types of families?
However, we know also, I think, as a general point, that people latch onto, in a very, very passionate and reactionary way, even the working class, to the family form. And you see this a lot in
yes, because it's a biological necessity.
Black intellectual authors as well. So my question is, how do we think a transition in such a way where we're envisioning a project of political education that might begin with a radicalization of the current family form that's on offer?
They're going to use the schools to try to push this stuff. I just don't know how to make this more clear for people. These ideas are real. They are existing in higher education right now. And the radicalizing of the population that they're talking about is going to take place through the public schools. Don't say I didn't warn you.
Only speculate a couple ideas apropos something like a commune, but I think that this is an invitation for us to think of other forms in also in recognition of the fact that, I think that because this group on like where we're coming from generally, even though we have these disagreements, we generally have solidarity with each other. I believe that putting family abolition at the center of militant struggle elevates the stakes. It makes our practice much more real, simply because it is the locus of the engine of social reproductive life, right? And to tell the agents of revolution, say the working class, the proletariat, to overcome this in full recognition of all of the ambivalent attachments that class derives from the family, even though it's abusive structure, we need to have some humbled awareness of that paradox, right? In my view. So I guess I want to say that there's an intellectual task, there's a theoretical task here. And psychoanalysis is not the only discourse. And I know that Ian mentioned a very nice point, and the separation of clinical insights from social critique is important. I recognize that. I even would say that, Girardian scapegoat theory, I mean, has so much application for thinking the alternatives to the family. I mean, the structure of the scapegoat, the structure of pre-Oedipal identifications in the family as a rivalrous, antagonistic structure, itself is transposed into institutions. It's inescapable. I'm almost more interested in understanding the psychic transplant process of familial structure outside of the family as a private bourgeois institution as such, in loco parentis laws on campuses, right? How do we understand this? How do we understand the status of adolescence as an ideal and its deleterious effects on political mobilization, for example? To me, I feel like it's a question of political education that we need to do on the left around, because, look, I mean, Engels, one of the things that Engels did is he talked about the degradations and the suffering of the working class family. We have new sufferings. We have different forms of suffering that people have. And I think as Marxists, it's extremely important to center the real hollowness of our society, the emptiness, the suffering that we experience. Literature, art, aesthetics, all of that's a part of that. Anyways, I'm going to stop there, but
thank
I
God.
think we can discuss this for so long. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. So I wanted to pick up on a particular theme in something you just mentioned, Daniel. And this tracks a theme in your book, apropos of the crisis of initiation. This idea, this critique of perhaps the status of adolescence as an ideal, this sort of conception of present day society as involving some sort of protracted adolescence. I think this is interesting because so far in these talks, and to some extent in the pieces written on family abolition, I feel like there hasn't necessarily been a great amount of explicit programmatic attention to the status of the autonomy of children, adolescents, and so on. And so I wanted to maybe open up the discussion, see if there were any thoughts apropos of the relationship between family abolition and the current, in particular, in second wave feminist theory of emphasizing the liberation of children, not only with regard to the extent to which the liberation of children does meaningful work in abolishing the division of gendered labor, but also in the extent to which that this is an expansion, this is continued work towards non-exclusion in this broader political sense that we seem to share as communists.
Great question. I'm wondering if Michelle would like to start, or I can start.
I wanted to add, Michelle, this made me think of your Comintern, the Comintern interview, which I assume will be related to, similar to the forthcoming novel you mentioned, because it provides a lot of the same themes, but maybe not from such an explicitly theoretical slant.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so I'll put it in the chat, but I did this piece a few years ago that is a full oral history interview and forms the penultimate chapter of the novel. So, and it's sort of talking with somebody who grew up in a commune and sort of what her childhood was like, and some of her opinions about the world and her approach to art and friends and what she's looking forward to. It has a kind of depiction of transformative justice in the context of having an abusive parent. And sometimes she spent in a teenage crash with a relatively high level of autonomy. And I think without question, the abolition of the family necessarily is raising the problematic of childhood liberation, childhood autonomy, childhood self-determination. I think I am interested in childhood development and parenting as social practices and sort of what it means to facilitate and enable somebody's self-determination in a context where children have vast desires that cannot be satisfied in the world, right? And what does it mean
What?
to have limits, to impose limits, to articulate limits in that context? And that's something that I think about a lot in my own parenting, and that there's a kind of necessarily dialectical element to how we think about the transformation of childhood. And one of the pieces that I have the most clarity about is destroying the division between the private household and the sort of collective political engagement around questions of parenting, so that when I'm thinking about the future, one of the rubrics that I come back to is, would trans children be safe? Like reasonably safe against, violent terror by their parents? And state intervention, right, is the sort of current mode of like trying to protect children, and that has tremendous and racist and extremely harmful consequences. And then certain families are able to like protect themselves in a shell of
Oh
privacy
my
that is really
God.
built into the family form, that then enables them to exercise a tremendous amount of terror on their children. And that part of my interest in the commune is the sense that there could be parenting and child units with very, deep emotional ties to each other, that then are in a broader economic and social context where other people see what's happening, have opportunities to intervene, and where the child has opportunities to be able to opt out, to be able to leave, and be supported in doing so, having a collective.
So in this person's commune, children can just choose to go be parented by other parents. Just like if it's not working out. And again, abuse issues are separate, but like to say that, first of all, I'm not even going to touch on the children have vast desires thing, because that is not a road I want to go down right now. But like she wants to create this society in which children will just be able to say, "Oh, I just want to be parented over here today. I want to go over here. I want to go over there." That doesn't make any sense. That's not healthy.
Community care around getting out of a bad situation or solving a bad situation. So that's some of where my thinking is at.
I had something to say following on from that, or that exact framing you used, Michelle. And this also responds to Sophie's question. Sophie's put a question in the Q&A section, if people can see it. I suppose the last one. Hello, by the way, Sophie. So the final question is, that said, would any of the panelists care to address the horizon of children's liberation?
Brucey is actually making a really interesting point. I saw this interview with a child predator. He said he would not approach a child from a strong family, where the father would be a threat. Puts it in context why they attacked the family unit. Thank you for that, Brucey. That's really, really interesting. God, that must have been, Brucey, was that like a hard interview to watch? Like, I can't imagine watching a whole interview with a child predator.
And in the context of today's concerted economical account on trans children's bodily autonomy by, should we call them, Christian nationalists. And that seems to follow through very clearly. Maybe let me firstly agree with Cordelia, like 100%. I agree that it's striking that, yeah, Kindercom, for instance, this text from 2015 I wrote with Kate Doyle-Griffiths is more focused around kind of nourishing and I guess the building side of things rather than the expressive expressive potential and so on. Although hopefully that is implied there as well. But it's definitely not the main focus. When we talk about autonomy, especially in the context of this. Yeah, in the context of this issue that Sophie is raising, this remarkable remarkable right-wing movement that kind of ranges from people I know, like comrades of mine, acquaintances, being filmed and harassed on public transport, through to like parents of children who are LGBT being afraid to like move around with them and so on because they're afraid of being called a child groomer and so on, through to more political, obviously in Florida, the Don't Say Gay bills, the legislation concerning healthcare
Yes,
for trans
I'd like to
children,
see that if you
which
don't
the
mind.
Heritage Foundation kind of minted and is being played across the United States. All of these things that I think are striking in the question of childhood autonomy, because we have to consider both sides of it. And one is obviously that they're going to cause a devastating amount of harm and horrible amounts of suffering. Another thing to consider in terms of childhood autonomy, however, is that they do pose a remarkable constraint on parental authority, which overall the United States as a set of governments is usually remarkably reluctant to do. Like, you're allowed to sign off on cosmetic surgeries your child is reluctant or even completely refusing to do when they're capable of speech. You're able to send them to conversion camps in other states. For instance, there's a huge list of things which parents are definitely allowed to do. But at this point, it seems like the anti-trans moral panic is such that this is kind of suddenly like restraints and constraints are appearing in the worst possible ways. So I don't really have like a conclusion to draw from that. But when we're thinking about the current climate,
Why on earth would these people be so concerned with constraints on transing the children in the context of a discussion that is about abolishing the biological family? That's a question for the chat. Why would these people in a discussion about abolishing the family be so concerned about constraints on transing the children? Any guesses? Any guesses? I definitely think they want the kids confused. Yup. Absolutely. That's their impetus. That's right, Jeff. I agree with that. Bot says they want everyone non-binary. Exactly. It is an avenue of parental power. Yup. They want a weaker family system so they can have access to the kids. That's exactly right. Yeah, thank you, Matt Walsh. Exactly. Well done, guys.
this is what is especially striking to me, that there now has to be a limit on parental relationships, on clinical relationships as well. One of the most interesting things for these bits of legislation from my angles is there are always specific exemptions of intersex children, because of course these operations, these damaging procedures need to be continuing as scheduled. So yeah, very precise and very specific constraints on parental authority seem to be appearing. And that is something which I guess needs to be like a departure point from us, as well as like something we are defensive against and try and reverse.
Thank you so much for that. I was curious on this topic. I know that Michelle, in your work, you drew on the concept of a social minimum in Fourier. I was wondering, apropos of the question of the autonomy of children and so on, whether any of you all have given thought to the concept of the validity of there being some sort of social minimum to the process of Bildung, to the process of formation or association in general. Is there, this is sort of a broad question, but I'm curious to what extent in the crash, in the commune, there's a particular level of formation, socialization, maybe in the Rousseauian sense of pushing people towards the formation of this general will. Whether there's a particular bar that we expect, that in these sorts of scenarios we would continue to expect people to meet? Essentially, I'm wondering how we square autonomy and communal demands in these settings for these schemes.
Such a hard question. I feel, Michelle, you would probably be best to first try this. No?
Go ahead, Daniel.
Oh, I mean, it's honestly something that I really would love for people to write about more. I feel that it does invite a touch of the aesthetics and science fiction to think it, which I think is exciting about what Michelle's doing as well, because I think that there's, like a sense in which a thinker like Ernst Bloch would be significant there. I think that, when you say Bildung, that's quite interesting, because I think that in a way the model of rational, subjectivity reliant on Oedipality, which I think in our conversation we were putting into question, which Michelle was coming from the standpoint that no, we need to think a full abolition of private family form as such.
How many patrons does he have, Barb?
Can we think of a kind of form of that's a radical proposal. That's a radical proposal that is kind of going back to Kant's what is enlightenment and rethinking the very, I don't know, it invites a radical imagination. So I really admire that, and I really think that that's the kind of cauldron of the kind of radicality that's important. I will confess that I don't think that I myself am capable of that kind of radical imagination. I think I'm like way like, although I'm really happy to be associated with people that are doing that, Now, I would invite clinicians. I'm not a clinician. I would invite clinicians on this call, on this meeting, to maybe weigh in on new thinking apropos childhood development. Would be interesting. So that's not really an answer, but I'll stop there.
I'll say with Fourier, the social minimum, I hope, is basically a universal commitment amongst communists and socialists and Marxists. I can't imagine a just society that doesn't have a social minimum, a sort of commitment to housing and food and healthcare for everyone. The more challenging point for Fourier is his commitment to the sexual minimum, to everyone's sexual needs being fulfilled, and this being a sort of collective shared commitment. And I kind of play with that idea a little bit in my article in Pinko. I don't know what I think of it. I mean, it's very challenging. I think a fundamental and unresolved theoretical, practical question of communism is what it means to maintain a universal social minimum without an institution that is separated from society and governing over it, right? So like the state as a form severed from sort of collective deliberative process or people's collective lives is a form that really lends itself to the universalism of the social minimum. And yet I think that this idea of a separated state is really antithetical to a communist society and to sort of key elements of communist thought. And like I sort of tried to square that in a fuzzy way with the communes in my writing, but like I think that's a question that we don't really know. Like, could an institution, there is no sort of governing global state in my vision. Could a society that has no unified, centralized, distinct social institution that could be identified as the
what do you
state,
think a commune is, bro? Come on.
to universality in material conditions? And what would that look like? What would the form of that be? Does that center around like a commitment to the concept of the human, of a, like what is the mode through which such a universality would be possible.
Thank you,
And
Brucey.
I've seen very little work on this, and it's something that I'd really love to see a lot more. And it raises questions that have considerable import for thinking about family abolition, thinking about childhood development, thinking about the sort of material conditions of migration and social circulation, right to movement, all sorts of things.
I just wanted to say, I think that's exactly that point about this being one of the primary, or perhaps the primary question around how we would conceive of this is exactly right. And I very much appreciated the challenges over the years since 2015. I think that's probably the one bit of the piece which we produced, that myself and Kate produced, which needed the most work, or at least clarification, if we're going to be generous. So, so yeah, I'm not saying I'm looking forward to continuing working on in coming years and seeing people develop in their own ways. And I think like Michelle says, it's a lot easier to identify the problem of like the ad hoc provisioning turning into arbitrary, wildly mismatched, clearly non-universal standards. It's a lot easier to identify that as a problem than to actually come up with a workable answer. However, I think we definitely need to. One thing I was curious about is, are there going to be people coming on like face-to-face, like people coming on camera? Because that sounds like fun to me if anyone's still got energy for it.
I believe someone, Adam, just wanted to come on camera and say something related to one of the questions Sophie posed. So Luke, if you're able to bring Adam on.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much. It's been a really fascinating seminar. I just had a question on capture, because I'm skeptical about taking capture as a kind of danger from the outset, but at the same time, I think from a sort of Fisherian point of view, not wanting to sort of get into 68 sort of style of a sort of tippies turned into Elon Musk kind of recuperation to get going. So I'm wondering, is there a kind of a danger in sort of formulating radical demands of family abolition from the outset against capture? Is there a danger that you could sort of do a bit of negative definition such that the concept of the enemy's reinterpretation or misinterpretation will over-inform or over-determine the demands themselves? So I'm thinking, I mean, to some extent, we have this in some social democratic circles, if you could even call them that, with the British Labour Party. It's how will this go in the red wall, by which they mean in these the Murdoch-owned sort of red top, highly reactionary newspaper spaces? And in a sense, also, isn't there a problem of overestimating the capacities for capture, insofar as, yes, it will always reformulate your demands because that's what it does. There'll always be a Che Guevara t-shirt, doesn't mean it doesn't sort of provide a good manual for guerrilla warfare, so to speak. So else, I'm sort of wondering, is the overemphasis on capture, or is it always an emphasis or preemptive strike against capture, possibly conceding too much to the other side's, one, their power to recuperate, but also this, whether, if not this, whether this recuperation has the intended effect, so to speak? Yeah, thank you.
I can say something briefly, Adam. I mean, you know, it's a beautiful point. I think that you identified this kind of the genus face of the question, because on the one hand, I think that the other risk of overemphasizing capture would be to quell the revolutionary desire as such. And you know, very few people talk about revolutionizing today in any true sense. The point is that could you talk about capture qua marketization as a marketizing logic? Obviously you can, but what are the limits of not overly bureaucratizing or overly rationalizing that in a kind of Adornian sense, yeah, as a kind of instrumentalization of capture? And so how do you strike such a balance? I wonder what Jules and Michelle think. I mean, because this was something that I write about, that in the early 1990s, you know, Deleuze and Guattari kind of recognized that Deleuze literally said the anti-Oedipus project gave way to what he called ultra-liberalism, in fact. So that was real. You kind of get caught flat-footed in a certain sense. So anyways, wonder. I feel like Michelle would and Jules would maybe have a better sense of this.
Anything and everything we do will be captured unless it's taking place in a moment of global insurrection.
Global insurrection.
I don't see any alternative to that. You know, like if any project survives of any sort, if any theory survives of any sort, it's going to be taken up in a wide variety of projects outside of our control, including projects that serve the interests of capital and empire, if they can be. And that this is, you know, like the nature of knowledge and collective activity is polyvalent and dynamic enough that there's nothing about it that makes that impossible. And I'm not terribly worried about that. Like, I mean, there's a lot of anxiety about trans people in the media right now, and certainly in the United States, there's some really frightening blowback that is a backlash against that. And, you know, that's real, that's significant. But like an uprising is going to innovate new ways of being, new ways of living, new ways of thinking. And if the uprising doesn't win, those ways will be taken up in the interests of capital along the way. And we can just expect that to happen. And outside of, you know, a direct and successful confrontation with capital and the state, I don't think there's any way of like preserving our little bubble of what we think is pure, right? That it's only made pure through the course of a mass struggle that unfolds and isn't defeated. And every uprising has been defeated so far. And perhaps someday there will be one that won't.
I almost feel like I don't have a lot to add to that because I'm in full agreement. Yeah, it's about the overall shape of the struggle and how that goes.
Hang on. So Nick says, I told Dennis Pratt that legit communists want to get rid of capitalism in the world, and he thinks communists will be happy living on their own. So there's a difference between authoritarians on the left and libertarians on the left. There are absolutely like more left-leaning libertarian, like they legitimately just want to be left alone. So that is a real thing. I understand what Dennis is saying. There are also ones that are much more authoritarian in their sensibilities. So I think it's, you know, it can go either way, to be honest with you.
And we can see this with any recent political movement you care to name, really. Like often there are these powerful, striking, arresting moments, and then these don't actually substantiate, or these don't actually last, to put it more simply. They don't last across the longer term, and what lasts is NGOs, the Democratic Party, the Labour Party in its worst forms. And yeah, well, that's the problem. I suppose when I say that I don't really worry about capture, it's not like part of my idiom, it's not part of my vocabulary. That doesn't mean it isn't a concern in another sense. Forgive me for my shameless pragmatism. But I suppose what I was kind of getting, what we're getting at in in this 2015 piece in Kindercom is exactly that. Families kind of worth the name, like chosen families, houses, whatever term we use for it. If they function as such, then what they're doing is producing people who are available for selling their labor, or keeping people who are not able to sell their labor alive indefinitely. So that is definitely the problem. And that is, God, talk about social reproduction. I'm being brought some tea. Anyway, I have that's like the issue. That's the issue at hand, which basically, if a lot of these things are not really worth the name, you know what I mean? A lot of these things don't succeed in actually reproducing people in any lasting way. And exactly, like, a lot of my discontent with stuff around this topic is my own experiences, like in these spaces which try and kind of like collapse revolutionary activism in private life. And for the most part, I found them horrible, as have most people I've known who've been involved in them. Like, it's very difficult to actually found a commune under capitalist conditions, for a wide range of reasons. So anyway, actually, I guess I just had one small quick one to answer because that was, I suppose, a bit bleak, but I have a very rapid answer to this question. I can't remember who put it. Okay, this is a question about whether, apparently Cordelia said something on Twitter, which is fascinating, which isn't a surprise, whether after a process of abolition, the family would still exist in natural language use, at least in some vestigial way, and with regards to children in the family, without making cookshops of the future, how would the speakers sketch something institutionally about making kids' lives better? I think in the language use thing, surely what we would see is that like relational terms would still exist, but there'd be like a total decay of the differentiation between an
They're
adoptive
talking about
or like
altering the
a
language.
biological father that would become like a meaningless or at least a trivial, like unnoticeable distinction.
They want to get rid of
I guess
biological
that's kind of like
ties.
the key point. And when you consider how difficult that actually would be, I guess this gets us back to the cuckold's dilemma. When you consider how difficult that'll actually be, that I guess that kind of shows up the struggle to actually kind of neutralize language choice is kind of like indicative, right? Anyway, that's as quick an answer as I can manage.
Neutralize language choice. Did you hear that?
Cool.
So
The struggle to neutralize language choice. That's like some 1984 level stuff right there.
I really think the question on capture also does bring us back to class analysis.
Newspeak,
in
exactly.
Organizational struggle, because there's certain examples also of where capture just couldn't take place. I think we see this within BLM, for example. Some places which were so true, militant, etc., that like capture was off the table.
You just
whereas
admitted
other
BLM
places
was
maybe less
militant.
so. And I think that a lot of that hinges on the activation of working class subjects in a way. So that's just, I'll just stop. I'll throw that out there as something for people to think about.
I will say that the discussion on capture reminded me of this really well-known rhetorical question Rawls asks, where he says, so is the family to be abolished then? And he answers in the negative. But there's like a reasonably robust literature of other liberal egalitarians, folks maybe sort of like the democratic socialist / social democrat you were talking about, Jules,
Exactly.
who on similar egalitarian grounds make arguments for something like what you were saying earlier, Michelle, that who you co-parent with should have no effect on your access to basic goods. So this is maybe kind of a contrarian question, but I was wondering whether any of the family abolitionist demands, in your view, are things either that could or should be fought for outside of, as Michelle put it earlier, these moments of insurrection.
I spent many years as a community organizer around HIV and AIDS issues and trying to win healthcare and emergency housing for people, and that's stuff that I care about and am committed to. I spent a lot of time in a Maoist context, in part for the ways that sort of reform and revolution are kind of blurred. And, I have a number of friends working on a campaign for universal long-term care insurance in the United States, which I think would do a tremendous amount to enable people to not worry about getting old quite so much or being institutionalized in a really horrific conditions in their elderly life. And there are many people in the US who have children because they are worried about getting old, right? And that no one will take care of them. And if we have long-term care insurance, like built into Social Security, for example, it would be a huge advance for this country. It would be just phenomenal. And, I have some sympathy with John D'Amelio makes this argument at the end of gay identity, capitalism and gay identity, that abortion rights expands the space for gay sex, right? Because it undermines the sort of coercive requirement of the family as a means of social reproduction, although he doesn't use that term, but that's what he's talking about. And I think that's beautiful and true. And winning universal abortion is part of struggling for family abolition on some level.
Abortion is part of the fight for family
come
abolition.
to see
All right.
the kind of political imagination forged through failed social democratic initiatives as being very limited for making sense of the political conditions. And I see this particularly in the biggest social democratic campaign in the United States right now is for Medicare for All. And Medicare for All would be a fantastic victory. It would be great. And lots of people are fighting over it. And yet, strangely, the vast majority of people fighting over it have a bizarrely narrow strategic and political horizon that boils down to like petitioning for Democrats to get elected. You know, it's like, this is it. This is the framework. And it's like the circumstances under which social democracy has been won historically are particular conditions of capital accumulation and tremendously volatile class struggle. Like, social democracy is won when it is the counter-revolution. That is when it is won. When it is a means of capitalism defending itself against its own destruction. And so given that, having a political horizon that limits itself to talking about these reforms is a strategic dead end. And so it's not a dismissal of the value of these things that leads me increasingly into talking about insurrection. It's seeing a framework centered around these things as having very little to offer strategically to the necessity of the present. And of course, there does have to be more than just insurrection. And that's, you know, there's some political, it's so long as the capitalism survives. And so like, how to sort of square those is something I'm still struggling with and still thinking about. But I can tell you that my conversations with Medicare for All people are so crushingly disappointing that I'm not looking to them for the answers in that.
I was actually not aware that John Rawls had asked the same question as Tom Wyman, and I'm now wondering if this is like liberal social democratic overlap or whether this is just philosophers training themselves to like deal with very peculiar questions that most people would not entertain fully. But either way, I feel somehow satisfied that the thought occurred to him. And I guess it's just our job to come up with very different answers, right?
I think he took it reasonably seriously. I know that a political philosopher, Véronique Munoz-Darday,
I don't even know what to say.
argued that in his own work, he actually didn't really have grounds to not support the abolition of the family. And so all I was getting at, and this was a little cheeky, but apropos of the whole capture discussion, there are probably very strong liberal egalitarian arguments for these kinds of things too.
And in the vulgar online discourse, I think this is also a very commonplace argument that like family abolition is the exemplary professional managerial class. But I'm still not convinced that the professional managerial class is really something that exists. I think that professionals and managers often have divergent odds and overlap in some places and not in others. So yeah, I'm kind of used to the rather convoluted claim that this is already like an ultra liberal position, but I don't have much of a reasoned response to it because I'm not really aware of the sociological category being applied there. So if someone wants
I told you guys this is the most dystopian of the dystopian.
So I'm mindful of the fact we only have about 5 or so minutes left.
Oh, thank God.
I wanted to allow you all to, if there was anything you wanted to say to wrap up your contributions, any work you wanted to plug again, now would be a great time.
My novel will be available for pre-order in 2 weeks. And I'm trying to get blurbs over the next 2 weeks. So if anybody on here has published a book and would like to blurb the novel, I would love your help. And it's my first time publishing a book, a little nervous, a little excited. So I would love people's support in any way in writing reviews and blurbing and organizing events. And it's a sort of depiction of practical family abolition in some ways.
I would just plug, I do a study group on psychoanalysis and politics, SGPP. I'll put a link to the YouTube where we post interviews with theorists and political activists, militants, etc. And so check out, we also offer kind of seminars. We offer study groups of different texts. We just did Engels as anti-During, which went really well.
I will not be taking any of these
so check
guys' classes.
that
I'll
out
tell you that right
as a
now.
plug.
That is not
My
going
book
to
is
happen.
available for like $40, which is way too much money. So if you want it, you can email me, and we can talk about, you know, a PDF copy if you'd like to read it. But just want to thank the co-panelists and Cordelia and the organization that made this possible. I really learned a lot today, and I really just was honored to be a part of it. Thank you.
So in terms of promotion, I'm not currently working on anything around family abolition. That may change in the future. Watch this space. I'm working on a book on the philosophy of intersex. That's probably not going to be out for another few years though. So that's me. I actually do have, I actually taken part in a podcast with Jordi Rosenberg called as part of the Festival of the Liberal Arts, and Jordi kind of charges that like family abolitionism kind of runs through all of transgender Marxism, which was not intentional, but that's a discussion we have on this podcast, so watch out for that, I suppose. And finally, yeah, thanks to my co-panelists for these really stimulating and really, I think, some good-natured disagreements, as well as like obvious like developing the same same cluster of ideas. And thanks again to our hosts. And finally, but certainly not least, the questions from the audience were really remarkable. I think there was significantly more questions than I could really reply to, and especially what irritates me about Zoom is the way that everything gets automatically deleted. That's like my least favorite thing about this platform. So I've tried to capture a few of the comments in my own ways, capture in the sense of copy and paste, don't worry. And I'm definitely happy to chat about stuff if any of you want to reach out to me, email or Twitter message or whatever. I'm definitely up for continuing this over the coming weeks. Not tonight though. So yeah, thanks everyone.
All right.
And finally, I wanted to thank Luke, who is off camera but has been running this event. I was asked to moderate this on.
All right, we're gonna go with that's a wrap for that. I can't take any more, guys. That was crazy. I have not heard word salad like that since I was in college, and I'm a little shocked because like we've watched a lot of family abolition stuff. We need to go back to Sophie Lewis. We've watched a lot of family abolition stuff, and it's never quite that dense and word salady. But I think that people kind of got the idea towards the end anyway. I was seeing people following along in the chat, which I thought was really great. Rosalind says, I don't understand what they mean when they talk about capture. Capture is basically like, so my understanding, and please correct me if I am wrong, my understanding of capture is it's like basically the opposite of liberate. So like if liberate is to free yourself from capitalism, to free yourself from the gender binary, to abolish capitalism, to abolish the gender binary, capture is going to be like the opposite of that, where you're beholden to it, like you're captured. Does that make sense? I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Don't quote me on that. We can check into it. And Tom J says, any take on Jimmy Dore or want to speak with him on socialism or any of this? I think Jimmy Dore is fine. I don't think that I'm not interested in speaking with Jimmy Dore. I mean, I guess I would if the opportunity arose, but like it's not something that's top of mind for me, Tom J. But I think Jimmy Dore actually does a pretty good job and is actually like a pretty reasonable person. Thank you for the super chat. All right, guys, just a couple more reminders. Tomorrow, I will be streaming at 2 p.m. because tomorrow I'm going to walk you guys through why I have been in kind of a little bit of a state this week with the purge of the New Hampshire Mises Caucus. The Mises Caucus was something that I was very committed to and dedicated a couple years of my life to, and then basically was spit in my face by the organizers of the Mises Caucus, not only with me, but with every other person in New Hampshire that had helped them and supported them over the last couple of years. And so I will be walking through how the Mises Caucus basically bent us over and fucked us Well, I mean, not really. We don't need the Mises Caucus is the thing. But a lot of us had been loyal to the Mises Caucus, and what they did was just like indefensible for me. Like, it's really, really upsetting. So I will be talking about that at 2 p.m. tomorrow. If you want to know what happened, I will walk you through the receipts. I will answer any questions, stuff like that. It's a rare Sunday stream for me these days, so I'll be doing that tomorrow. And you can catch that. And then, of course, we will be doing movie night in my supporter Discord at 8 p.m. We are watching Goodfellas, and you can get access to the supporter Discord by becoming a member of this YouTube channel, by becoming a member of my locals or my Patreon, or a paying member of my Substack. And the links are all in the description below. And I'm really looking forward to Goodfellas tomorrow night. It's going to be great. We're going to have a good time. All right, guys, that's all I've got for tonight. Please mount that like button on the way out the door. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Take care. Have a great rest of your night. And we'll see you soon.